From 1946, it's The Time of Their Lives with Bud Abbott and Lou Costello.
I'm Lainie.
I'm her dad, Jim.
And this is Take Two Screen Reviews.
And this happens to be one of my all-time favorite Abbott and Costello films. And that's strange because this is a departure for them. This does not follow the formula of an Abbott and Costello film. There's no vaudeville routines in here. There's no musical interludes. They're not even playing Bud and Lou. They're definitely playing roles in a very well-scripted story. They're not even a duo in this film. They only cross lines in one scene directly. And part of that has to do with the fact that the comedy team, there was tension between the two partners at this time. So they took the film and they took very separate roles, but that actually works out really well here. And it's an exceptional film. It would have worked with actors who weren't Abbott and Costello, but because it was Abbott and Costello, I think it adds a level of comedy to the film that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
I really liked this too. I really liked how Costello was actually in it more, and he was more of a lead, where Abbott was more of a supporting character. It has nothing to do with the actors, but I just did like Costello more.
I think that's the nature of the comedy team. He's the more sympathetic of the two because Abbott is always bullying him and getting him into trouble. And that shows how well he does his job. But you're correct. Costello is definitely a lead here, and I would consider Abbott to be a supporting character. The other lead would be Melody Alyn, who is played by Marjorie Reynolds. So Costello's character and Marjorie Reynolds' character are definitely the leads here. The story takes place in two time periods. We start out in the Revolutionary War era, and Costello is playing Horatio Prim, who is a tinker, and Marjorie Reynolds is playing Melody Alyn, and she's engaged to a gentleman named Thomas Danbury, and the movie is set on the Danbury estate, the Danbury Acres. And basically what happens is Costello and Marjorie Reynolds' characters are mistaken as British spies, and they're shot and killed by the colonial army. They're buried in the well on the Danbury estate, and the soldiers curse their souls to be forever imprisoned on the Danbury estate unless some evidence comes forward that proves that they weren't traitors. And that's the setup of the movie. And then time passes and they're actually ghosts. And we move up to what would have been present day at the time of the movie, which was 1946. And the house has been rebuilt and reconstructed and painstakingly recreated with historical accuracy, and even the original furniture has been put back in here. Now, Abbott, as you said, is a supporting character. He plays a dual role here. In the Revolutionary War era, he plays Cuthbert Greenway, who is a butler in the household. And he and Horatio are in love with the same girl. So he's very mean to Horatio, Costello's character. In the modern setting, he plays Dr. Ralph Greenway, who's a descendant of Cuthbert, and he's a psychiatrist. So he has a nice role, but it's very different. And the film is mainly focused on Melody Alyn and Horatio Prim, because they're the ghosts, and they need to find some sort of evidence that proves that they weren't traitors. And that's, where our storyline comes from.
I really liked this storyline. I liked how Costello was a ghost and he was scaring other people, but he was scared of himself and Melody at the same time. Right,
so it creates this level of comedy because normally we think of the ghosts as being the ones that are scaring other people. And he is doing that. He's doing it in a funny way. And most of his mischief he takes out on Abbott's character because he still sees him as Cuthbert, and he looks like him, of course, because it's the same actor. But you're right, there's a double layer of comedy there because he's supposed to be scaring people, and when he does that, it's funny. But also, he's scared of himself. He's scared of Melody because she's a ghost, and these things will happen. And then other things will happen, supernatural things, during the course of the film, and that scares him as well. And it creates a lot of comedy, but it's comedy within the context of the film, not at the expense of it. So it works really well.
Another thing that I liked with the ghosts is that Melody would shake to become completely transparent so you couldn't even see her. And then she could go through walls or go upstairs or go wherever she wanted to. Costello, on the other hand, he either runs into a wall or he doesn't come completely transparent or he gets stuck midway. Like, he gets stuck in a cupboard once.
Right. So as you said, they do this kind of shake thing. They shimmy their bodies. And on Marjorie Reynolds, it reads just fine because she does it and she's elegant and it's an attractive kind of a thing. And with Costello, because of his body type and he's comedic and he understands physical comedy, when he shakes, you laugh just watching him shake. Mm-hmm. But you're correct. She's able to make herself completely transparent and she can pass through walls or pass through doors or move from one level of the house to another level. Whereas he will do it and he will run toward the wall and bang into the wall and fall backwards, or partially go through the solid matter and wind up kind of, stuck in the middle of the solid matter. So it's very funny. Again, creating humor within the context of the plot, not at the expense of it.
I really liked how Costello and Melody kind of worked, because their relationship, I guess, was cool, because like they would kind of be Abbott and Costello, but not really.
Right. They had a really good dynamic. And it's interesting because in an Abbott and Costello film, you look for Abbott and Costello to play off of each other. And again, that's not what happens here. But Costello was able to play off Marjorie Reynolds so well, and she had great timing, and she really played, she played the part so well that you didn't miss the banter between Abbott and Costello because you had it with them. And she was up to the task and she held her own comedically and acting wise against everybody in the cast. So you lost nothing by having her as a lead, and her character was really well defined. Now, they weren't love interests. She's in love with Thomas Danbury, and Costello was in love with Nora, the maid, as was Cuthbert, which set up the love triangle there. But because they have been trapped for 160 some years together as ghosts, she does kind of flirt with him, and he doesn't really know how to handle it. And that, again, creates comedy where you wouldn't have that same comedy. It's a different type of comedy than you get with Abbott and Costello. It's not vaudeville, but it still works. And Abbott adds a different type of humor to the piece because he's being tortured by the ghosts because of his ancestor. And he's wonderful in that role. He does a great job with it. And again, because they were consummate professionals, you really couldn't tell that they weren't getting along in real life. I saw no tension between them. People will say it. I've read reviews where they say, oh, you could see that they weren't getting... I don't see it at all. I see two professionals, two great comedians, two excellent actors in a piece, and I think it's one of their strongest films. Yes,
me too. I really liked this. I liked how Abbott was still in it, but he was a supporting character. I liked all the characters that weren't ghosts in the modern day. And Emily was really the only one that I was suspicious of, and I don't know.
Well, Emily, of course, she's the housemaid, and she's a little creepy. Right from the start, she seems a little creepy, but right from the start, she indicates that she can sense the ghosts. The people who have restored the house, they know that there's rumors of the place being haunted by these ghosts, these two traitors. Everybody knows the traitors were buried in the well. There's a plaque that indicates it. There was an original plaque that was put up by the soldiers who cursed them. And then, of course, Horatio will throw the plaque over the fence from time to time because he's offended. He actually had a letter from General Washington that indicated he was a patriot. He gave that letter to Nora. Nora asked to take it because they were supposed to elope the night that he showed up at the estate. She takes the letter because she was going to take it to Melody, and she felt Melody would help them elope because once she saw the letter from George Washington, she would, feel for their cause and she would help them elope. Well, Nora never gets the letter to Melody. She gets taken by Thomas Danbury because she overhears his conversation with these British spies, and she finds out that Danbury's in league with the British. So they take her, and they take her off, and we never see really what happens to her. But he takes the letter from her, that letter from George Washington that was Horatio's letter. And he hides that in the clock. There's a secret drawer in the clock in the library, and he hides that letter in there. And that letter is the piece of evidence that the two ghosts need to prove that they are not traitors. It proves their innocence. And because this house has been historically recreated using the original furniture, once the ghosts go in the house and they realize that the furniture is the authentic original furniture, they feel like, oh, we can get the letter. It's got to be somewhere in the library, and they start figuring things out. As it turns out, Emily senses their presence because she's psychic, and because the ghosts have been haunting the place, the people decide to have a seance. So they have a seance, and throughout the course of the seance, they figure out different things. They figure out the identity of the ghosts. They figure out that they need the letter to prove their innocence. Danbury, before he died, had written memoirs, and the guy who restored the house, Shelley is the character's name, he has a copy of the memoirs, and it mentions Melody in there, of course, and it also mentions a tinker, and the tinker was Horatio, and through that book, they figure out that they need this letter.
Right.
And the ghosts point them toward the library, and as it turns out, that clock is not an original. It's a reproduction. The original is in a museum, and the museum won't let Shelley anywhere near it because he's been trying to get all the original furniture back for the house. So ultimately, Abbott's character, Dr. Greenway, says he will go get the clock because he wants to atone for all the sins of his ancestor, Cuthbert. And that creates a lot of humor because he has to go get the clock. They won't let him near it. He steals the clock, and there's a lot of humor.
Puts it in his jacket.
Yes, he hides it in his jacket, in his coat, and he brings it back to the estate. And there's a lot of humor because the police come, to arrest him because he stole the clock, and the ghosts are trying to get the letter, and it all kind of comes to a head and finishes out much the way you might think it would, but with a lot of humor involved. But good humor, never over the top, always within the context of the film.
And I really liked that. And then the other thing I really liked was how they communicated at the seance.
Yes, we always see a seance from the people who are doing the seance. We see it from their point of view. This time we actually got to see their point of view, but we also got to see the ghosts.
Right.
And how they were drawn to the seance, how they were asked to knock on the table,
Twice is yes, once is no.
Right, to indicate their answers. And so we got to see it, and then they help the people sort out the riddle, or the mystery of what's going on, because they need to know the identity of the ghosts. There's a painting of Melody in the library, so the ghosts bring that in, and of course the people at the seance just see this painting floating into the room. And then actually Thomas Danbury actually speaks through Emily at one point. He uses her as a vessel by which he can speak and give them a clue to help them. And he's only there for a short time, so he has to give the clue. And it's basically a riddle, but they figure out that it has to deal with a clock in the hands of a clock, and that's how they know they have to have the clock.
I really liked this movie.
There's a lot to like in here. I can't think of one thing I don't like about the film, except the fact that maybe they weren't getting along in real life, but I don't see it in the film. I just don't see it in the film. To me, it's a great piece of nostalgia. It's one of the greatest efforts by Abbott and Costello. It doesn't rely on vaudeville routines or anything that they had done previous. They created original characters here, and they showed just how talented they truly were. All right, last take.
See it.
Definitely a see it here too.